I am happy to talk to you today on conventions that are charged with the responsibility of protecting the international environment. I am Talibita Moses. I am a lawyer by profession, an environmentalist, and an activist that is charged with the responsibility of ensuring that citizens enjoy themselves in a tobacco smoke-free environment. Today, I have elected to talk about the big five environmental conservations. One of the earliest global environmental instruments was the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Flora, and Fauna, called the CITES. This was conceptualized in the 1960s and was signed into legal binding in the 1973. Essentially, CITES views international wildlife trade as a major underlying cause of biodiversity loss and contains provisions charged with restricting the indulgence into such a trade. So the thrust of global environmental conventions subsequently shifted towards the protection of particular habitats such as wetlands, and this is called the Convention on Wetlands, also the Ramsar Convention, which entered into force in 1971. Sites of natural or cultural value, which is called the World Heritage Convention of 1972, or the protection of species migrating between sites, the Convention on Migratory Species of 1983. A significant milestone was reached in 1992 with the Convention on Biodiversity. This, of course, is the first global comprehensive treaty to place environmental, social, and economic objectives on an equal pedestal or equal footing. Although different in conception, scope, and philosophy, all five conventions are commonly referred to as the biodiversity related conventions. In contrast, these conventions are supposed to work um, simultaneously for purposes of protecting the world relations of the environment. So, in contrast to the other issues, notably trade, there is no single international body dealing with the environment. All five biodiversity conventions, for instance, operate independently and have separate secretariats, even though increasingly attention has been paid to building synergies and avoiding duplication. The big five may have important implications for business activities in terms of where the oil and gas industry can operate, and equally important, how it should conduct its operations. So, this, if we bring it into the Ugandan context, um, especially that wherever we are going to explore for oil, this is where biodiversity is rich. And for that matter, it is important that we look at these conventions in relation to how we are going to utilize or maximize our natural resource potential, considering, like I did say yesterday, that these um, oil deposits at one point will deplete. So, in the Ugandan context, one of the Ramsar sites, in Uganda is the Lutembe Beach, which is on the gateway, the gateway into Uganda if you're using the Entebbe International Airport. Now, the Ramsar site, formerly known as the Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, especially waterfowl habitat, provides a framework for national action and international cooperation for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. Ramsar covers all aspects of wetland conservation and wise use of wetlands, recognizing that wetlands are an extremely important ecosystem for biodiversity conservation. The criteria used to identify wetlands that may be of international importance can be found on www.ramsar.org stroke key criteria HTM. The convention defines wetlands as areas of marsh, fine peatland, or water, whether natural or artificial, permanent or temporary, with water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt, including areas of marine water, the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 milliliters. To date, the Ramsar Convention remains the only global convention dealing with a particular type of habitat. The convention, which originally at 1962, which at 1962, rather, which was originated at the 1962 Convention on Waterfall Conservation, was adopted in Ramsar, Iran, in 1972. As of 2000 and as of 2003, as of 2003, there were 138 contracting parties to the convention. And this means that all those contracting parties are obliged to ensure that it really works. With 1,308 sites amounting to 110 million hectares, that is about 271.8 million acres, designed in the Ramsar list of wetlands of international importance. So the other convention is, like I did say, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Flora, and Fauna of 1975. So, which already we said is called the CITES. And CITES represents a cooperative effort between countries to prevent loss of species resulting from international wildlife trade. It works by subjecting international trade in specimens of selected species to certain controls. Significantly, not one species protected by the convention has become extinct because of trade since its implementation. So the CITES, which we must applaud because we would not be having any wildlife, which of course is getting endangered. So CITES, the CITES, like I did say, places especially wildlife that is wildlife that needs the intervention of the international trade to regulate their activities in as far as protecting wildlife is concerned. Otherwise, business needs to be controlled. If not controlled, then um, the international players will definitely lose a lot. So, other than the international convention uh, dealing with, which is dealing or trying to regulate against international trade in wildlife that is endangered, there's the Convention on Migratory Species of 1979, which is also called the Bond Convention. And this can be found on www.unep slash, no, 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 a hyphen, org stroke CMS. The Convention on The conservation of migratory species of wild animals, also known as the Bonn Convention, aims to conserve terrestrial, marine, and avian migratory species throughout their range. The convention facilitates the adoption of strict protection measures for endangered migratory species. The conclusion of multilateral agreements for the convention, rather for the conservation and management of migratory species and cooperative research activities. The convention has two appendices. Appendix 1 lists migratory species that are classified as endangered and where urgent international cooperation is necessary to address the issue. Appendix 2 lists other species that require or would benefit significantly from international agreements under the convention. The convention, of course, entered into force in 1983 and now has 81 member countries. That is as of the 1st of March 2003. Within the convention, there are a number of agreements covering specific migratory species, including the Eurobats, which is EUROBATS, the agreement on the conservation of bats in Europe concluded in September 1991. The agreement on the conservation of small cetaceans of the Baltic and Northern Seas of 1991, the African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement of 1995, the Agreement on the Conservation of Cetaceans of the Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and the contiguous Atlantic area of 1996, the Agreement on the Conservation of the Albatros and the Petros of 2001. And now this takes me to the CBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity. So the three main goals of the Convention on Biodiversity, also with its acronym, popular acronym CBD, are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable share of the benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources. In a marked shift from previous agreements, the CBD calls for a much more holistic approach to biodiversity by recognizing its ecosystem, species, and genetic levels. The CBD was one of the major outcomes of the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, termed as the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. The convention has 186 parties, with notable exception to with the notable exception of the United Nations, definitely. And so that is why protecting such environment and the ecosystems is key and very central, especially to those that are interested in introducing new and artificial life into the ecosystem where we already live. And this definitely has an impact on the citizenry, because the citizenry who are proud to live in an earth where we all belong. So the United States is notably not an exception. Other formal agreements that resulted from the Earth Summit, from the Earth Summit, of course, include the United Nations Convention to combat desertification and the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which seeks to protect biological diversity from the potential risk posed by the living modified organisms resulting from the modern biotechnology, has since arisen out of the CBD. So member states have structured their work into thematic programs, which include marine and coastal biodiversity, agricultural biodiversity, forest biodiversity, the biodiversity of inland waters, and dry and subhumid lands. They have also considered cross-cutting issues such as biosafety, access to genetic resources, traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices, including, of course, intellectual property rights, public education and awareness, and incentive measures. In addition, a clearinghouse mechanism has been established under the CBD to facilitate the sharing of information and capacity building. Two publications are of particular assistance to understanding the convention. Particular assistance and to understand the convention uh, is the IUCN's 1994 Guide to the Convention on Biodiversity and the CBD's Secretariat 2001 Handbook on the Convention on Biodiversity. And of definitely several articles are relevant to the relationship between energy development and bio safety conservation, which definitely include Article 6B, which talks about general measures for conservation and sustainable use. Each contracting party shall, in accordance with its particular considerations and capabilities, integrate as far as possible as the appropriate the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity into relevant sectoral or cross-cutting sectoral plans, programs, and policies. Now, I want to dwell further on this because Uganda is at a stage where Parliament passed and happily the president rejected to sign into law the biodiversity, rather the biosafety and biotechnology bill of 2019. So this debate has been going on, except that the actual stakeholders who ought to know have not been involved. And the actual stakeholder is the non-suspecting consumer who will buy these particular products and not know that they are heavily engineered, but it's at the expense of our traditional and indigenous crops. Now, Uganda is the pearl of Africa, and Uganda, of course, has a lot of traditional crops, traditional species, including animals, including maize grain, including millet grain. So these, of course, are the ones that are getting Ugandans jittery or developing cold feet towards trying to come up with an enabling law to ensure that the ecosystem is definitely protected. And so it is incumbent on Ugandans, all the lawmakers interested in coming up with a law like this, to engage or to have every citizen indeed participate so that um, the best can come out. Now, for um, it is important for us to appreciate that there too is an International Plant Protection Convention of 1951, which was amended, of course, in 1979 and 1997. So the International Plant Protection Convention, which is called the IPPC, is a multilateral treaty deposited with the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and administered through the IPPC Secretariat located in FAO's Plant Protection in FAO's Plant Protection. Let me see. Oh yes, it is important that I really look up. Yeah, in FAO's Plant Protection Service. So there are currently 117 governments that are contracting parties to the IPPC, and the purpose of which the IPPC is to secure common and effective action to prevent the spread and integration of pests to plants and plant products, and to promote measures for their control. The convention, um, the convention, well, you will bear with me because I'm trying to refresh my mind with the literature here. So the purpose of the IPC, like I did say already, is intended to protect to protect the spread and introduction of pests to plants and plant products. So the convention provides a framework and forum for international cooperation, harmonization, and technical exchange in collaboration with regional and national plant protection organizations, RPPOs and NPPOs, respectively. The African Convention on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources is the other convention I will elect to talk about before I call it a day. And before I call it a day, so that I can let you do other work, and you will bear with me that I also want to have um, you'll bear with me that I also want to go and do other work, because as I speak, it is today is the 4th of September 2019, and it is exactly 27 minutes past 7. So I am supposed to go and report at work. So this convention, the African Convention on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources of 1968, this convention was entered into by the heads of state and government of independent African states, undertaking individual and joint action for the conservation, utilization, and development of natural resources that include the soil, water, flora, and fauna by establishing and maintaining their rational utilization for the present and future welfare of mankind. And this, of course, speaks to why it is important to protect natural resources. Now, there is also a protocol concerning protection of areas and wildlife fauna in the East African region that was entered into in 1985. This protocol is for the protection and management and development of the marine and coastal environment of the East African region. The aims are for the contracting parties to take all appropriate measures to maintain essential ecological processes and life support systems, to preserve genetic diversity, and to ensure the sustainable utilization of harvested natural resources under the East African jurisdiction. In particular, it refers to endeavors to protect and preserve rare or fragile ecosystems as well as rare, depleted, threatened, or endangered species of wildlife, fauna, and flora, and their habitats in the East African region. To this end, it calls for the contracting parties to develop national conservation strategies and coordinate, if appropriate, such strategies within the framework of regional conservation activities. I thank you for having taken time to look at my YouTube channel, and thank you. Until next time, I sign out as Talibita Moses. Thank you very much.